Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Ted Rollins. It's time for the Daily Sidebar. Opening statements in this case begin 7 days from today. And at this moment, we have 14 jurors seated. One additional juror has been selected today, a white woman in her 20s. She's a social worker who says she thinks police reform is necessary when it comes to mental health.
You were asked a question whether you or someone close to you has ever supported or advocated in favor of or against police reform, and you wrote, family members have discussed support of both. What do you mean by that, and how does that, what was the general tenor of the conversations on both sides?
It was typically focused on training in response to situations of like mental health or things like that, having more specific mental health and not so focused on the what seems like a presumption of guilt right away, that sort of thing.
3 other jurors were dismissed today for a variety of other reasons. Let's bring in our colleagues. Julie Janae is in Minneapolis covering the trial. Julie Grant and Michael Ayala also here. The defense used a strike to eliminate juror 115 right out of the gate this morning. She appeared to be maybe a little too excited about the prospects of being on this jury, and wasn't the first person to come with that mentality. I mean, every answer she had kind of was like, oh, I did say that on my questionnaire, but I could be fair. Please let me on. Bottom line is they said no. Let's take a listen.
You personally participated in a couple of marches, and you carried a sign that had a fist on it, I think. Yes. Why did you do that?
My friend invited me to go. We were living in Minneapolis at the time, and it was close by. And she's like, "You want to go?" And it's something I'd never done before, so I was like, "Yeah, we should do it." And
so what was it about the march that you thought it would be, I don't know, entertaining or interesting or just an experience? Like, why did you think that?
Well, because like I said, I'd never done something like that before, and I've seen that stuff in movies or whatever, so it looked interesting, and of course I'd seen the video and things, so I was like, yeah, let's go check it out, and so that's what I did. And
why did you decide to carry the sign you did?
Because my friend and I we were making the signs before. She said, we should carry these, and I was like, yeah, so we did those.
So you made some other signs as well?
I didn't make other ones, but it was like she made one, I made one, and then I think like her boyfriend made one too, or something like that. So.
Okay. Was your participation sort of contemporaneous to the time, or was it like when the incident occurred, or was it weeks later?
I want to say it was about a week later, I think.
All right, Julia Janae, let's start with you. This was no big surprise, but this was the only one who got bounced this morning.
Right, not a surprise that the defense was going to use a strike on juror number 115. She was a nursing assistant. The pool reporter estimated that her age was in the 20s or 30s. She sounded really cheerful when she was answering her questions, but of course the defense digging into her attending a protest. A lot of the jurors that we have already on this jury panel have not attended any kind of march or protest, which I think is significant looking at how many people were involved in protests, especially here in Minneapolis. She also said that she had a favorable view of Black Lives Matter as a movement, but did not have a favorable view of Blue Lives Matter, mentioning that the police officer can take off their uniform. It's not like their skin. Ultimately, she said it was not George Floyd's time to die in her questionnaire. And I think even that personal note in the way that she said that was one of the other reasons that she was strike for cause by the defense.
Tried her best. Julie Grant, 116 then was up, and the defense obviously wanted her. The state tried to get him for cause, bringing up his fishing, saying, you're going to miss a bass tournament. You sure you can't do this, can you? And his employer wasn't going to be paying him, but the bottom line, they needed to use one of their strikes. He was an interesting guy because he didn't know anything about anything. And he admitted, he said, I don't watch the news. I stay out of that. I keep my nose out of those types of things. But He was kind of a blank slate, but
Right.
he did have some things that you could see why the state wanted him gone.
Sure, Ted. Yeah, God bless him. He seems to be living a really simple life and seems to be really disinterested in the news and current events. And that's problematic for these attorneys because they're trying to get a read on him, right? Voir dire is all about trying to get a read on these prospective jurors. What does your gut feeling tell you? What are they saying? What's their body language look like? And when he said he doesn't post opinions, I thought about how these attorneys, we're seeing them day in and day out, right? But surely they have assistants who are digging deep on social media and trying to find out how these folks live their lives, what they're all about, what opinions or preconceived notions they might have. And so they probably tried without success to figure this guy out. And then the questioning wasn't helping when he's going, no. And I mean, it was kind of stunning his unawareness with the Capitol riots on January 6th and what little he knew about that. It was concerning. So I don't blame the state for striking him. They couldn't get a read on him. It was smart to let him go, Ted.
Yeah, let's listen to, because I agree. When they started to go to that, I'm like, oh, here we go. He's going to know all about that, right? Oh, no, he didn't know much about that either. Take a listen.
Are you aware of the events that happened in Washington, D.C. in January?
Yes.
And how did you learn of those events?
That was all, I mean, I was at work and that's a big thing at work, people talking about it, so, and then again, you see clips of it, not something that really followed there.
Can you describe to me what you saw when you saw it?
Well, that massive amounts of people around the Capitol, in the Capitol, and then obviously milling around where they shouldn't be. I guess there was a couple of injuries and possibly deaths.
All right, Michael, anything stand out to you from what we saw this morning in terms of the jurors who either side used a strike for that you think maybe shouldn't have, or juror 118, who's now part of the panel?
Yeah, 118, I can talk about her. She's someone who's going to be on this jury. And as she was being voir dired, I thought she was a good juror, a good potential juror. She seemed to be neutral. She seemed to have an interesting point of view in terms of both George Floyd and the defendant in this case. She's somewhat neutral, is kind of where she stood. The two things that jumped out to me was, and I think you mentioned this on your show, the training aspect. I think as someone who has received training for certain types of situations, she might have a better understanding of how difficult it is sometimes under duress, how to implement perfect training. And I think there certainly were mistakes made. So they're going to want someone, the defense anyway, who understands that, you know, you do the best you can with the training you have, and sometimes mistakes are made. But the second thing that jumped out at me was she talked about being afraid about the riots might end up in the suburbs, right? And I'm thinking when she's in that jury room, that's something that's got to be on her mind, because she knows that a verdict in this case, perhaps the wrong verdict, whatever that might end up being, could lead to riots, and her safety is going to be concerned, the safety of the suburbs. So that has to be something that's going to sit in her mind. And what role will those thoughts play in her decision-making process? Is she more susceptible to some sort of compromise verdict as a result? So those are the things that came to my mind.
Interesting. Yeah, you could argue that all of the jurors are open to a potential compromise verdict because of what they all witnessed collectively. This is one unique thing about this jury pool. They all had a collective experience, and that is the days and weeks following George Floyd's death. That city was rocked. I mean, it is to this day a different city than it was at the time. Let's take a look at the jury makeup as we have, as it stands now. We have two multiracial, 8 white and 4 black jurors so far. The number of strikes remaining for each side are, they're down to their last couple of the state, down to 2, but there's only 1 left. And and Julia, it's our understanding that this last juror to be picked is going to be the juror who's on call for the next 4 days, right? This juror's likelihood, the next one to be picked, of actually serving on the jury is pretty low.
Yeah, this is a backup juror. This is just in case one of the jurors on the panel has to back out or something happens, a sickness, just an absence. The judge wanted to make sure that there's no issue on March 29th, that we can go forward and we will have 14 jurors. So we have 14, but there's still one more that the judge wants to have on the roster.
I know it's because of COVID that they're a limited amount, Julie, but I'm a little nervous that this is a 4-week trial, and the fact there's only 2 alternates. We've covered many trials on Court TV where alternates come into play, and sometimes it's boom, boom, one after another, let alone during deliberations.
Exactly. You make a great point, Ted. And I think that was why, after thinking about it, the judge thought we better seat someone else just as a precaution, because this is going to be an extensive trial. From what we understand it, the projection is 4 to 5 weeks after the opening statements begin on Monday. And so who knows what can happen? That's a lot of time. Things occur. Jurors drop out for whatever reason. So I think it is very wise that the judge wants to seat another alternate juror just in case something occurs. And I understand that COVID has made things difficult, and perhaps there would be more alternates from the outset were we not in this situation. But I think it is smart to work around that just in case we lose one.
Yeah, Michael, I mean, let's face it, if there was no COVID here, we'd have 4 or 5 alternates minimum, I would think, with a 4-week trial.
Oh, no question about it. Again, this is just another example of how COVID comes into play. I mean, this is a high-profile trial. I mean, just recently we had a trial where folks were watching it at home, and then they would come in and talk about it and got kicked out of the trial. I mean, that's something that could absolutely happen here. We've seen a couple of very enthusiastic jurors, so who knows what they might be involved in. So, I'm with you, Ted. It's a little worrying, the fact that there are only 2 alternates, but this is the world we're living in, and they're going to have to make it work.
Yeah, and I guarantee you there's going to be some issue with potential juror misconduct coming up during the trial, but we will wait and see, and hopefully that will not happen. All right, that's it for the Daily Sidebar. Thank you all. We're going to step aside, take a break, and have much more when we return. Stick around. Court is in recess until 1:30 Central Time, 2:30 Eastern. Once they're back, we'll get you back in for the end of jury selection. Stay with us.